Over the hill and through the moor, the candleman's walking up to your door. He lights a new candle and walks to your bed, puts the light at your window and leaves with your head. That's the nursery rhyme my granny used to tell me when I was young. I remember that short rhyme terrifying me as a child. I would cower under the covers in the old bed at her small country cottage, which was next to Bodmin Moor. I was just too scared to sleep. Granny described him as a tall, pale man in a long robe who liked to kill little children that caught him creeping around the house at night. And whenever he killed, Grandma would say in a hushed voice, he would always leave a ghostly candle in their window, flickering away. At that, she would yell out and make me jump back in fright, while she shrieked with delighted laughter. The Candleman. Even now the silly name gives me chills. It seems like such a horrible, scary thing to say to a child. But then again, my gran was always considered a scary woman. She was very small, with tanned, weathered skin and cruel, sunken eyes that always seemed to glare at me. After Grandad died, she hardly ever left her house, just sat in a rickety rocking chair, telling stories of the Candleman or other cryptids and legends from the moor. She seemed to relish my fear, laughing madly whenever I jumped at a bump on the stairs or a bang from the kitchen. It was fair to say that I never wanted her to babysit me when my parents were working. I hated her and the thought of that remote old cottage on the very edge of the village. Anyway, when I grew up, I learned that it wasn't her fault really. Grandad's death had shaken her up, messed with her head. She didn't know what was appropriate for children, and she liked to drink a lot. Grandad was only alive when I was a baby, and I never knew him, but I learned when I was older how much he had meant to my gran. Without him, Granny had been broken. She drank a lot and stayed home. Even the local authorities couldn't convince her to get out and see people. She even got my parents to do her shopping online so she wouldn't have to get the bus into town. She died when I was 13, and I guess it really didn't come as much of a shock. In my eyes, she was incredibly old and frail anyway. She looked half dead all the time. I'd always assumed that one day we'd just stop going to visit her at the cottage and I'd be allowed to stay home alone. Now I'm 30, with a husband and my own little girl. We have a comfortable home in a small town just the other side of Bodmin Moor, and I couldn't be happier. Well, I say that, but there was one thing that's shaken me up recently. It was just a silly thing, but it did scare the hell out of me at the time. It was a weird nightmare. In this dream, I was in my current bedroom, comfy under the covers, when I heard a tune being played on the piano downstairs. I knew exactly what was being played as soon as I heard it. A nursery rhyme, The Candleman. In the dream, goosebumps ran up my arms and neck, while shards of ice filled my stomach. I sprinted down the narrow staircase to the living room. My husband was nowhere to be seen. As soon as I burst through the doorway, I saw a tall, pale figure in a flowing brown robe holding a thin white candle. This figure had its back to me and was making its way towards the door to my kitchen. The Candleman. I was frozen to the spot. It was really him all these years later. He was about 6'4" or maybe 5. The robes were billowing around him from some unknown spectral wind. He seemed to know I was watching him. Slowly, so slowly, he turned to face me. His skin was just as wrinkled and dark as my granny's. Long, shaggy tufts of grey hair fell across his forehead, also moved by this mysterious breeze. His eyes were black as coal, beady like 2 buttons in the recesses of his ancient skull. As he locked these malevolent eyes on me, a grin spread slowly across his face, revealing yellow, cracked teeth. Now, fully facing me, he began to move closer. The the light from the candle in his hand illuminating every crease and furrow in his foul skin. He extended a bony arm towards me, still holding the candle, white wax falling to the floor in long wet droplets, and then I woke up suddenly in a cold sweat. I turned on the light and saw my husband sleeping soundly next to me. Deep, regular, rhythmic breathing. I was shaking and decided to read some of my book until I went back to sleep again. I put the nightmare down to too much cheese before bedtime and the coming of Halloween with all the adverts online and the movie trailers for horror films, but, it freaked me out anyway. The Candleman was really my only weakness. And I guess, if you're asking, that takes me up to yesterday. Well, yesterday night. Halloween weekend. I was trudging back from a party at 10:30 in the evening. Not drunk, I don't drink these days, but still woozy from tiredness. I had been working all day and taken my daughter to the school Halloween disco. By rights, I should have been tucked up in bed early. I couldn't resist sneaking a few hours in with my best friends and real adult conversation. I thrust my hands into my coat pocket for warmth on the walk home. The moon was playing hide and seek behind the murky clouds. The only light was from the street lamps that cast warm yellow pools onto the pavement. Whilst I was walking back through the piles of crisp autumn orange leaves, I caught my feet making a rhythm, keeping steady time. My mind wandered, and the poem of the Candleman popped into my head. Try as I might, I couldn't stop thinking about the rhyme from my nightmare. Over the hill and through the moor, the Candleman's walking up to your door. He lights a new candle and walks to your bed, puts a light at your window and leaves with your head. My heart began to thud to the beat as I walked down the poorly lit street, leaves still crunching underfoot, the fickle pale moon casting long shadows along the path ahead of me. Repeat, repeat, over and over in my head as I walked, not breaking pace. In my mind's eye, I could see this Candleman from my childhood and from my recent dream, thin and ghostly, running up to me with his robes like a cape about his shoulders, cutting off my head in one swing with an ethereal metal axe. It was silly, I know, but the dark streets can make your imagination run wild sometimes. For some reason, I just couldn't seem to walk faster or even slower as my feet thumped out the regular beat and the words punctuated every single thought. He lights a new candle and walks to your bed, puts a light at your window and leaves with your head. I arrived at the start of my own road and began to calm down. I felt stupid for having let the old poem get to me. Nobody else knew about the Candleman. My parents told me it was just something Granny made up to get a rise out of me and scare me into being obedient while I stayed with her. I was perfectly safe under the streetlights. I was perfectly safe walking to my house, wasn't I? I could just reach into my inside pocket of my coat and get my keys and... As I arrived at my front garden, I noticed something move at the very end of my road. The houses were all in darkness, save for a few bedroom lights on behind the curtains. It was hard to tell what the thing was at such a distance. I opened my garden gate with one hand and clutched the bunch of keys with the other, the metal pushing painfully into my palm. I don't know why, but I looked to the end of my street again. Now the movement was closer. Now I could see under the lights a tall, wizened man in a flowing brown robe, standing about 5 houses away from me. His face was shrouded in darkness. Somehow, I knew he was staring directly at me. Once again, images of the dreaded Candleman flooded through my head, sending my heartbeat into overdrive. I shook it off. Okay, it's just a guy out for Halloween. Nothing to be scared of. Everyone dresses up this weekend. I tried to reassure myself. I attempted to slow my breathing. With my hands still shaking, I began to unlock my front door, praying that my husband was inside, just asleep in front of a TV or maybe cooking a late-night snack. Don't ask me why, but for some godforsaken reason, I wanted one last glance at the robed figure. I turned around to see him walking away. Oh, now he was just a man, wearing a monk's costume. I almost imagined that I saw him pulling out a phone from the folds of his robes. My anxiety immediately subsided. Standing in the dark front garden with the door wide open, I couldn't hear the TV or any kind of noise from inside my house, so I wistfully looked up, wondering if my husband had fallen asleep reading our daughter her bedtime story. It was then that I saw it. Terror stabbed at my heart. There, in my daughter's bedroom window, flickering softly, was a thin, white candle.